Welcome to the Sisterhood of Healing podcast, the podcast that wants to help you reach your best and most divine potential. Each week, we dive into topics concerning inner healing, wellness, and spirituality. We discuss strategies and practice from our own personal experiences regarding higher energies, trauma, and connecting to the divine as we take you through our own personal journeys to discover the highest versions of ourselves. In combination with guest speakers, we bring you a comprehensive guide to mental and spiritual wellness and the ability to connect to yourself and the world around you on a deeper level. I'm Nicole, and I'm Christina, and we are two sisters who want to take you along on our spiritual and healing journey. We are each on our own individual healing and spiritual path and bring unique perspectives regarding yoga, chakra healing, meditation, intuition, and trauma healing. Sometimes life is messy, sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes everything falls perfectly into place. Join us as we navigate the path to divine enlightenment together. Hello, sisters, brothers, and non-binary listeners to the Sisterhood of Healing podcast. On today's episode, we have guest Nadia Merchant, and we're going to be talking about poetry as healing and post-traumatic stress disorder. Thanks, Nadia. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So excited to have this chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and chat with you guys about all this.
So we'll get started. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, my name's Nadia, and I am a police officer here in Ontario. And 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD. Because of my line of work, I'd gone to a couple traumatic, some gruesome calls at work, and my journey kind of starts there. Up until that point, I was just kind of chugging along. There was nothing even conversation worthy. But 2 years ago, everything my entire life shifted. And yeah, and that's kind of where I think where our story here begins.
And so, sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
What kind of came out of that? So you're saying like that's where your story begins. Like how did things kind of transform from there?
So, like I said, I'd gone to a couple gruesome calls. So this was in 2021. The summer of 2021 is kind of where things started. I had gone to a difficult call, and then the very next night, I went to another difficult call. And then 2.5 weeks later, I went to another difficult call. That one was like really gruesome. And it piled up on me. Like I always had, I would say, like good resiliency. Like I always just kind of dealt with things as they came. And when things were hard, like I generally just kind of worked through them. I managed, but these couple things kind of piled up on me really quick. And I don't know if it was the how little time, where it all unfolded or what, but I was struggling, and I didn't realize it initially. I did what I thought I had to do. I did what I thought was expected of me, and I kind of just kept going. And probably after that first call, I probably should have taken a step back and maybe assessed, but I didn't. And I kept going. I thought strength was a measurement of how much you could take without pausing. And so, I felt that it was my responsibility to myself and to my job to just keep going. And so I did. And then a couple months later, I had another call that was really difficult to deal with. And I still said nothing. This is now the winter of 2022. And I've still said nothing. I've still just plugged along and tried to manage. But to be honest, I don't think I realized just how bad, how rough shape I was actually in, until March, the beginning of March of 2022. My boss called me in. He's like, Nadia, like, what's with you? You're like not performing to like what we would expect and what we've seen from you in the past. You're not responding to like messages that I've sent to you, and like, what's with you? And I stood there in his office in full uniform and broke down, ugly crying, like bawling, snot, tears, like just ugly, ugly tears. And at that point, I couldn't really say nothing at that, right? Like at that point, it's sort of hard to just sweep it under the rug and say that, oh, no, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Because I was very much not good. And so he pulled me off the road that day. And that was March 3rd of 2022. And I haven't worn a police uniform since that day. And I haven't worked since that day. And that was very surreal. Very surreal. I thought when I came off the road, I was like, okay, maybe I just need like a couple weeks. I'll be okay. I'll come right back. I'll be fine. I'm good. Just need a breather. And at that point, I really started to see how like rough shape I was in. I started to see a lot of triggers. One major trigger of mine includes trains. It sounds random, but one of the calls that I was at was a train a train call. Without going into detail about it, but I live 300 meters from a set of tracks, and it started to paralyze me. I was like getting very, very anxious every day that I expected the train to come. I would wake up in the morning, yeah, and already be anxious for the train that I expected in the evening. I would be crying. I wouldn't want to leave my house because I didn't want to like encounter trains or tracks unexpectedly and then be a mess in front of people. I really just became very insular, really secluded. I didn't talk to anybody. Like for the longest time, I was lying. I was saying I was fine, or yeah, I'm okay. I just need a little bit of a breather, and I'll be back. The same lies I was telling myself. I was telling to other people because I didn't want to be seen as less than. I didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't want people to think that I was not a capable police officer, or even worse, in my opinion, I didn't want to be seen as like an incompetent female or an incapable female. And I felt like I had to keep up with everybody else. And I was ashamed. I was extremely, extremely ashamed of where I was at and what I was experiencing. Um, and the triggers just kept coming, and it was all very, very overwhelming and very scary. And I really didn't know what to do. I had a doctor. I have a doctor. She's amazing. A psychologist. But in the beginning, it felt like I couldn't keep my head above water. Like I couldn't even tread. Like I've just felt like I was just drowning in a sea of PTSD. Like it was the only thing I could think about. It was the only thing I could see. It was the only thing I could feel. I was just in a sea of it with literally nothing else happening in my brain or around me except for it. And that was kind of the beginning of my PTSD experience.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a lot of good has come out of it, which I can see now 2 years in, but at the time it felt horrible.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question that's like going through my mind is, in your line of work, what resources, if any, are available to police officers?
There's a lot of talk about changing the stigma around mental health, particularly in first responder communities, because in these communities, like, we're the doers, we're the fixers, we're the saviors, we're the ones who go in and fix and save and help when nobody else can. when that when the tables are turned there, it's a really harsh, very difficult reality. So there's a lot of talk now, and plans moving forward about how to deal with this. It's a lot of encouragement to talk to other people. It's a lot of encouragement to see or talk to doctors. Um, but in practice, it's a work in progress. It's very, very much a work in progress. We're opening up dialogues now, but we're opening up dialogues in a community that traditionally doesn't speak about this.
Mhm.
So it's a very slow moving thing. I don't want to say that there's no resources. There are, but access to them, um, comfortability around accessing them is a work in progress. There
Mhm.
are there are some things in place, but a lot of those things that are in place are not quite sufficient. Um, they just don't work in real time. Like in theory, on a computer, maybe, but like in practice, not so much. Um, so I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction in general, but I think there's a lot of work still to be
Mhm.
done in that area.
Yeah, and
So
I imagine too that and this is I mean my own perception of your line of
Mhm.
work, but I imagine that, despite initiatives and like opening dialogue, I imagine that, there's still a lot of perceptions around
Mhm.
like strength and
Yes,
weakness and
yes,
seeming strong and seeming weak and like and what that means. And
absolutely.
yeah, and how I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but how does that kind of contrast against like the reality of like
Well,
getting
I think like the reality is in this type of work, you see a lot of things and you deal with a lot of things that require emotional processing. It's hard. It's hard, and I think it's unfair to expect ourselves to deal with these things alone, um, because it's just not reasonable. Um, so I mean, in terms of strength, I think a lot of times we do it to ourselves. We discredit each other in saying, oh well, this person or that person didn't work hard anyway, or like we're not good to ourselves. It's funny we talk about a thin blue line as being like a line of camaraderie in policing, but sometimes I think we draw our own lines too thin,
Mhm.
and we don't we don't give each other credit for how our mental health can really affect us. And sometimes it's not like, in my case, it was several calls that sort of were in a really short period of time and were very like, it's this one, it's this one, it's this one. They were easy to point to. But a lot of people dealing with PTSD in this line of work, it's cumulative, right? It's over years. It's many traumatic events that have piled up. It's not just one thing that is causing them to be in a compromised mental state, right? So when we can't just pinpoint, oh, it's that thing that hurts, it's that thing that's causing them pain. I think we, in general, are quick to judge. But you mentioned like strength and stuff. I think again, what I was touching on earlier is just we almost act as if we think we are impermeable, and it's just not fact. Like no person is. A police officer is still a person with emotions and feelings. uh, we still see things that are horrible, and to expect it not to permeate, to expect it not to affect us, and to expect that of ourselves, you're setting yourselves up for failure, right? And I did that. That's exactly what I did. It's not that I was cold and calloused. I just assumed that I would be able to continue going on the way I was going on without trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think too, I mean, it seems as if, you get into these positions in society, like you said, like your fixers, your helpers, where you're like, this is the person I have to be. I can't
Yes,
be on the other side of that. That's not who
right.
I'm supposed to be. I'm the one that helps. I'm not the one that needs help.
That's right.
Yeah. So what's that kind of like when you like that day that you had that breakdown? Well, I guess this will be two questions. I'll ask like one at a time, but what was it like? How did you confront that being on the other side?
Not well. Like I was I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of where I was at. I was not wanting to admit to my coworkers, um, like what my mental state was. Like, so that day I was pulled off the road. My boss was kind enough to try and send me home, but I didn't want to go home. So I said, like, can I work in the office today instead? And so I had suddenly switched jobs that day, and it was noticeable. Like, so, people were curious as to why I was suddenly doing a different job today. And I lied. I lied because I didn't want anyone to know. So being on the other side was a really, really difficult thing for me. Admitting that in this moment, I was not feeling strong. In this moment, I was not feeling capable of doing my job. That was a really, really tough thing.
Mm.
Really tough.
And then contrast, what was the moment like when your your boss kind of acknowledged that something was off and that you just
Mhm.
finally sat down and told him? Did you have kind of like the same feelings? Was it a different feeling? Like what was that experience like for you?
That was the same. I didn't feel at that time, I didn't feel a sense of relief. Like, I knew in him saying, that I wasn't allowed to be on the road that day, I knew that was the right call. He 100% made the right call by pulling me off the road. I was in no shape to be policing. So I don't fault him for that whatsoever. It was absolutely correct. It still sucked. It still
Mm-hmm.
sucks. I still felt horrible. I still felt ashamed. I still felt extremely embarrassed. I was shocked. I remember feeling shocked that this was happening to me. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was getting pulled off the road, that my mental state wasn't like, you know, good enough to do the job. Um, I remember it felt very, very surreal. Like, because I just never expected it to be me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. You're always that strong person. Like it's not like you said, that you just think you can just like be strong all the time and make your
Yeah,
way, and that's the way it is.
yeah, yeah,
Did
exactly.
you, sorry, did you have people in your personal life who noticed changes in you before you were pulled off the road, or did everything just kind of like blow up, for lack of a better word, at like
Yeah,
one time, or like it all just opened up?
probably. They probably noticed. But to be honest, I wouldn't have listened even if they had said something.
Mm.
Um, I don't I don't think that I was even in a position to listen. I don't think I was in a position to acknowledge. Um, I think that my mood was definitely affected. Like, my general mood, was probably the most noticeable thing, and feeling, like, generally short, like, impatient, um, more than I normally would. I would say that those were probably the most outward, signs to other people. Um, but yeah, even if they had said, "Listen, like, and I don't know that you're handling this well," or whatever, I don't think it would've I don't think it would have sunk in. I don't think I would have listened. I don't think I would have acknowledged that I was in as much pain as I was in.
Mm. Um, when you were experiencing like these traumatic events, were you going home and like venting to people, or were you just like holding it in
So the very
outlet?
first, sorry,
Like, did you have any outlets for that?
the very first, uh, the very first call, I was numb. Um, I had ended up staying at work much later than when my shift had ended. I'd gone home. It was a night shift. I'd gone home, later in the morning than I otherwise would. I I wanted to cry on the way home that day, but I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get home. I was afraid I'd be crying too hard. I wouldn't be able to get home. Um, and when I got home, I was sort of just numb. And then the following night, I was scheduled to come in, and I was encouraged not to come in by several people, and I was like, "No, I'm going anyway." And I think that was my attempt at avoidance. I think I thought if I went into work, then I could, put my mind elsewhere and not deal with what it was that I was feeling.
Mhm.
So I put off I put off the first night's call. The second night, a similar call happened, and I buried that too. So I didn't have like I mean, I cried about it eventually, but I don't think I actually like fully emotionally processed it.
Mhm.
Um, outlets, there were people that I could talk to, absolutely, but it was also one of those things where I didn't know how much to talk about it. I didn't know if I really wanted to talk about it. Um, I didn't really wanna feel it. If I talk about it, then I'm gonna cry, and then I gotta deal with that. So, sometimes it was, like, almost easier to just bury it and
Mhm.
sort of try and move on. An outlet for me at that time, like, I like going to the gym, I like lifting weights, so, I was doing a lot of that, probably, like, to a fault. Um, at that time, it was like I was just kind of, like, expelling my emotion into the weights and stuff. Um But I didn't have a lot of, like, good ways of dealing with it. Again, I did have a doctor, same one I have now, and she's fantastic, but I wasn't I wasn't truly processing what I was experiencing.
Mhm. So is that how you got into like poetry as a way of processing that?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed writing. I've always enjoyed writing poetry, but I I never did it with any sense of seriousness. Like, I kinda just wrote it occasionally when I was, I don't know, home alone and lit a candle and the mood felt right. I'd be like, "Okay, well, maybe I'll write I'll write tonight." There's no, like there's no actual dedication to it.
Yeah.
Um, but then after I first got diagnosed, which was shortly after I got off the road, I was diagnosed pretty quickly. Um, I was like, "Well, I didn't know what to do with all these emotions, all this feeling." So I started writing a little bit. At that time, the focus wasn't so much creativity. Uh, the first couple poems were called PTSD, PTSD 2, PTSD 3, PTSD 4. Like, there wasn't a lot of creativity happening. It was more just like a venting outlet. Um, but I started to realize that I could use that in a more creative tool. And because I enjoy writing and I always had, it kind of just flowed naturally. And I started to write a lot more in a lot more of a dedicated way. Um, I started writing, a lot during the day when I didn't have a lot going on, except for dealing with what I was emotionally. And I started to notice that what I was writing was actually it was kind of decent, and maybe I should put a little bit more effort into this because it was also I found it very calming. I found it super cathartic to do
Mhm.
that. But at this point, I still wasn't posting anything. They weren't public. It was just something I was doing for myself, and was enjoying. And so that's kind of how it started. My doctor had also suggested that I write out the occurrences that had caused me some trouble, and I was struggling with that. Like I wasn't able to emotionally put myself there again and like go through it. I felt like every time I sat down to write out these occurrences and what it was that was causing me so much hurt and so much anxiety, I would get stuck. Like I would start writing and then I would get to a point where I would just stop because I was stuck. And I realized that I was trying to write. I mean, this was over weeks and weeks. I couldn't do it. And I realized that I was trying to write these things out for her as if it were a police report. Factual. Who, what, where, when, why. But I had all this emotion and I couldn't fit it into what I was trying to write because a police officer's emotion doesn't belong in a report, right? So when I had that realization and I switched narratives and started writing it like this is my story as opposed to on this date I was traveling westbound on this street, I I started to realize like I was actually able to get my emotion out. I was able to really process the calls on a more personal level. So the combination of those two things is kind of how the poetry thing came to be. And then one night at the end of November of 2022, I was sitting here and I was writing and I was home alone and I poured myself a little whiskey and I sat here and I was like, you know what? I'm going to try posting some of this on Instagram. And I mean, the background there though is like I was extremely ashamed still of where I was at emotionally. So this was like monumental. And I've always been a very private person, very closed book. Even like my family and friends even tease me about it. Like I was very, very, very private. So this was like the the thought of doing this was like totally outside of my comfort zone. Um, but I was like, you know what, screw it. Like I'm gonna give this a try. And the intent was like maybe by putting some of this stuff out there, I can shed some of the shame that I'm feeling surrounding it. And I started posting a couple poems and it was very tentative. I was really nervous. I didn't want people to see it. I've said before, like I hoped everybody would see it, and I hoped nobody would see it. Um, but it started to pick up. Uh, People were really like resonating with the things that I was saying. I was writing. Uh, I like to write in a way that's like super raw, super vulnerable, but like easy to read. Um, and it really seemed to resonate with people. Like they seemed to really understand what I was saying from the perspective of their own lives. Because like I wasn't posting about the calls that I went to. I was posting about my emotions. Um, and I think that I really believe that the human emotional experience is a very universal thing. Each of us here have walked different lives. We've had different experiences that have informed our thoughts and our emotions around certain things. We've, we've each had our own individual hardships, but if we talk about the human emotional experience, I think that emotion is a very, very universal thing. If I talk about shame, if I talk about love, if I talk about building yourself up, when I talk about, reinventing yourself, coming back from difficult traumatic experiences, I mean, these are things that most people can relate to. And that's how I write my poetry. That's what I write about. Um, and like I said, I've been really honored and really fortunate that it seems to touch people. They seem to, like what I've written, and it seems to resonate with, people's individual lives. And I love that so much. Like I'm um, so honored by that. And it was very, I felt like the more I wrote and the more positive feedback I got, I was like, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I can put myself out there a little bit. Maybe I can say these things. Maybe, I can write these things, and maybe I'm not the only one who feels this way.
I think that's a beautiful thing about poetry too, like you said, is that it's not about the experiences, it's about the emotion. And I was
Yeah.
saying before we started recording that your final poem, like when I first met you,
Yeah.
um, just resonated so deeply. And I mean, we've had different
Mhm.
experiences, but it I can't even describe the feeling when art resonates with you. It's
Yeah.
just like you feel so seen on such a deep level. And
Yes.
it's because sometimes it's hard to articulate your experiences,
Mhm.
it's articulate your feelings, but then I can't even articulate it now. But
Yeah.
like everyone's been saying with poetry, it is that feeling, and it's so important to kind of get that out. And like you're saying, like your emotions were locked inside. It's
Yeah.
when you just make that connection, like it just clicks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I love it. Like it's such a powerful and uniting thing. And I mean, you said you like that poem, like that means everything. I am so grateful, so appreciative. Um, and I just love that. I love when something I've written resonates with somebody, anybody, and one person takes a poem and is like, man, I feel that. It's so rewarding. And, I'm so excited to be able to do this because it, it's been so healing for me. And I think, when multiple people stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, I feel like I felt that too. I felt that too. You start to realize like we're not alone. Sometimes I think, especially when it comes to mental health, we really like tend to internalize it in the sense that like, we don't want people to see, we don't want people to know, we don't want people to have this perception of us that we are struggling. But really, I think like we're all struggling. We're all a little broken, right? We're all a little broken at some point in our lives. We are all a little bit broken. And I mean, I really think it's time that as a general as a general statement, I really think it's time that we stop pretending that that's not the case because we all go through things, and I don't know. Like I said, we're all a little broken.
Yeah, and I feel like in society we're on the cusp of something here. Like I think this is like year zero of
Yeah.
discussion of mental health, of understanding mental health, of making it normal, of making it as normal as this conversation is, right? I think we're at
Right.
year zero, and I think I hope 100, 200, 300 years from now, it just like working on your mental health and exercising mindfulness and
Mhm.
all like strategies that we use to like make ourselves feel better and kind of get out of these experiences that we've had, or like the effects of these experiences that we have. I hope that that's normal, because
Yeah.
it should be, and it's not, and it's so
Mhm.
necessary to 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 connect with our emotions, to talk about the difficult things, but we don't.
We don't. We don't because we wanna be seen as, like, I don't know. Is it because we wanna be seen as strong enough, competent enough, capable enough, whole?
Mm.
I'm not sure what the mindset is, but whatever it is, it's wrong,
Yeah, and who created that mindset? Who's dictating it? Who's upholding it? Who decided what it means to be strong? Like
right?
strong, different things to different people. But
Yeah.
like like in your line of work, there are certain ways of acting, certain ways of thinking, and
Mhm.
like, you don't want to be perceived in certain ways. And
Right.
yeah, and it's like that in so many aspects of society and so many jobs. And we're like, it's who's it helping? It's not helping anybody.
Nobody.
Like
Especially
everyone.
ourselves. Especially ourselves. Like, we're only harming ourselves, and I mean, speaking for myself, like, as soon as I started to not be so ashamed of this, as soon as I started to speak openly about this, as soon as I started to be like, "You know what? Maybe I'm not the only one, and maybe it's okay to say these things." I suddenly started to feel, like, released from them. Like, I started to see noticeable changes, noticeable improvement in my PTSD in general when I started to be less ashamed,
Mm.
when I started to, like, hide less. Like it was just like such a marked improvement. And I gotta say, like, there's gotta be something to that.
Yeah, we carry a lot of trauma in our bodies, and we carry a lot
Mhm.
of carry stress in like certain
Yeah,
places in our bodies,
yeah,
and yeah, definitely talking about it is gonna release that, right? It's just like a release, total release of like energy of trauma, and
yeah,
obviously, it takes time and it takes work, but
it does.
I think that's incredible that you saw that those changes as soon as you started talking about it.
Yeah, as soon as I became less ashamed, I noticed such a difference.
Wow. So what was one of your biggest obstacles then? Like I think it's amazing that once that you saw that transformation start as soon as you kind of put that shame aside, but what were some of like the big obstacles that you faced that maybe even like you're still struggling with?
So initially it was shame. I would say like that was like the biggest obstacle initially. Um, and then I mean, in a more like specific instance, like I said, like trains have been a very, very difficult thing for me. They continue to be, but I'm better than I was. That's been though, I mean, that's been a 2-year long road. Um, and a lot of work. A lot of work. I would say that the triggers themselves have been the most difficult part of PTSD, along with the shame, because they kinda come out of nowhere, right? Sometimes you least
Hmm.
expect it, and then all of a sudden it's there, and there's so many, like, little I mean, that's, like, the biggest trigger, but then there's a lot of more minute ones that sometimes surprise me. I found that I was, like, seeing trains everywhere. I live in Niagara, and, there's a lot of trains around here,
Hmm.
and it became hard to, like, leave the house. It became hard to, like, go to the gym, go to the grocery store, do, like, normal things because I was so afraid of facing the emotion of it. Um, the obstacle was, like it was daunting. It was daunting. It was like, I'd rather just stay here and deal with the ones that I expect a couple nights a week, uh, close to my house than it was to go out and not know when those triggers were gonna happen.
Do you have strategies that you use like when you are triggered by something? Are there certain strategies that you use like in the moment, especially like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah, so initially, like, I found I wasn't really breathing. Like, I would just, like, tighten up. I wasn't breathing, my chest would feel tight, there were times I was, like, almost, like, hyperventilating, I'd be bawling uncontrollably, and I couldn't, like, breathe through it. So that was, like, one of the first things I kinda had to learn was to breathe through it. Um, a lot of, like, the mindfulness and stuff was, like, taking situations in which I felt anxious and learning to calm myself and to breathe. Um, Another big one in the beginning was, like, my self-talk. I would tell myself that I wasn't gonna be able to get through it, or that it was gonna be too hard, or I know that I'm gonna have a breakdown, and then I would have the breakdown and be like, "See?" So, it was a lot of, like, the breathing and the self-talk were, like, the initial strategies. Now, still breathing. Now I tend to believe myself when I say that I can get through it. I have a weird one. I have like a coin. It's called a challenge coin. It's an old, military tradition, but it's kinda started again with police, but I usually have it in my pocket, and it's heavy, and it's quite large, like, it's bigger than a toonie, um, and it's pretty much always on me. So sometimes when I'm struggling, uh, I use that as a grounding technique. I'll hold the coin, I'll kinda just like, it's very textured, it's got, like, a bunch of designs and stuff on it, and so sometimes I'll, like, run my hands over it, my fingers over it, and use that as a grounding technique. That one has been a wonderful technique, or a really, really helpful a really, really helpful one. Um, those are probably like the main ones.
Yeah, they say like breath work is so good for
Mm.
everything that you do, and you concentrate on your breath. It just really centers you into the moment. Because I imagine you just get
Mm.
so like so
Yeah.
caught up with like when you're hearing the train hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like my whole chest would get tight and I would just feel it coming through me. Like it was just such an anxious um response. And
Mhm.
my psychologist, like one of the first things she had me doing was meditating to learn to bring myself from way up high down down to a more calm state and learning to like breathe. It seems so simple, but learning to breathe is actually really hard to do.
It
Yeah,
is. Yeah. I will
definitely not simple.
It's not.
I
It's not.
oh, I say to everyone like meditation's one of the things that just like really helped me, and it's something that I
Yeah.
still do. And I say to everyone, I'm like I'm like, you can do whatever you want, like it's your life. I'm like, but you need to join this cult of meditation because it's like
Yeah.
it like works wonders.
It does. And to be honest, I was skeptical initially. I was like, "How is learning to breathe and how is meditating gonna help what's happening in my head right now?"
Yeah.
Because it does not seem like that's uh, a reasonable strategy, but it did work.
Yeah. Wild how well it works.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay, so aside from meditation and breathing, was there like was there one moment that aside from the moment where you knew that you had to take time off and you were standing there with your boss in the office,
Mhm.
was there like a moment where you felt that you were starting to transform, where you were like starting to like get over that hump and you were starting to like turn a new leaf? Have you had that moment yet? Maybe you have you, maybe you've had a couple, but what was that moment like? Is there a moment that stands out?
Yeah. I would say, like, one of the first moments was putting stuff on Instagram. That was huge. It was definitely, like, I would say the very first s not the first step, because there were so many steps and so much work before that. Um, so much time and effort from my doctor. So I don't wanna say that it was, like, Instagram that fixed me, because it's not. It's definitely not. But it was just, like, the first time that I started to, like, do something that felt like it was countering the PTSD, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Um, and then I would say, like, I'm starting to feel like I'm over the hump, over the worst of it, and that probably set in, I don't know, maybe a few months ago, um, when, like, my poetry page really started to pick up, when I felt like I had a purpose. That was a really big issue for the first many, many months of my diagnosis, was like I didn't know what to do with myself. I was just sad and anxious all the time, and I'm at home with no sense of purpose whatsoever, outside of the house, right? Like an external sense of purpose is what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I need that. Like I need that personally to feel, like, fulfilled, and I just wasn't. I didn't have that, and I didn't know what I was gonna do. I didn't know, am I ever gonna go back to policing? I was convinced that I would never, be able to, so then I was like, "Well, what do I do with myself now?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
I what are my transferable skills? I'm not gonna walk into a company and be like, "I can taste your bad guys." Like, what what do I do? So, I went through, like, a period where I really just didn't know what to do with myself, and when I started to, like, feel that poetry and speaking to people, and having these, like, raw, vulnerable conversations about PTSD, about mental health, about my journey, when those things really started to form, and I felt like I had a renewed sense of purpose, that was, like, another big milestone in healing for me. Um, and I mean, I still don't know what I'm gonna do, but at least I feel like I have a purpose. I have something that is very, very fulfilling for me. And I have goals. Like I had no goals there for a long time. I have
Mm.
goals. I have things that I want to accomplish. And that's been huge for me too. So I would say over the last couple months, as things have really grown and I've gotten out there a little bit more and I'm talking to people more and my poetry is being more well received and more widely seen, like that's been big for me.
Hmm. I love that so much. And like you're still connecting with people, like, and your job
Yeah.
as an author, you're helping people, you're connecting people. It's just like
Yeah.
not a completely different, sorry, an alternative path, but you're doing the exact same thing.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. But I get so much fulfillment out of this. Like, I
yeah.
love having these conversations now, and it's such a stark difference from where I was at. Because, like I said, like, I was lying. I was still telling people I was at work when I wasn't. I'm
Hmm.
so ashamed, and now I can sit here and have this conversation, and I'm not sitting here sweating about what questions you might ask me or anything like that. Like, it's just become a very healing experience to be able to talk about this. And I love having these connections. I love the the connections that you're able to make with other people. And like I said before, like I'm so honored when people connect with my words. It's been really, really fulfilling, really good.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Um, do you have one piece of advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. I would say that, and maybe it sounds cliche, but you're not alone.
Mm.
You're not alone. And it probably is cliche, but
Mm-mm.
the thing is, like, when you start to talk to people, you realize that we've all gone through things. We're all a
Mhm.
little bit in. More people will understand where you're coming from, not necessarily the experience, but where you're coming from emotionally than you think. And that was a big realization for me. And I think it has widespread significance. So yeah, my piece of advice would be find somebody that you can talk to and believe that you're not alone.
Mm. You're not. You're yeah,
Uh,
not cliche. Not
right.
cliche.
No, good. Good.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful reality that you're not alone. Yeah.
Right. It is. It is.
So if our listeners want to get in touch with you, maybe read some of your poetry or share maybe some of their own stories or connect with you, where can they do that?
The best place would be Instagram. They can find me under my name, Nadia Merchant, or my handle is she's underscore writing underscore now. She's writing now.
Very cool.
Um, yeah. Yeah.
I love that. Well, keep
Awesome.
writing because your writing is inspiring and it's
Thank
touching so
you.
many people and helping so many people. So don't stop, keep going.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
No. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks
Yeah,
for having me, guys. Thank you.
take care. That's it for our show today. Thanks for joining. Remember, you can always reach out to us on our socials on Instagram at sisterhood_of_healing or on TikTok at Sisterhood of Healing. We love to hear from you, so please reach out to us at any time. Thank you for journeying with us today. We'll see you next time.